What if struggling the first time is actually a sign that you're on the right path? Let's uncover how to turn that struggle into a success. Stay tuned until the end for my go to strategy for having first time success more likely, even in the face of challenges. If you're ready to tackle your next big challenge, get my freedom blueprint at adriennegreen.com. It is packed with actionable insights that are going to help you achieve success with your real estate investing portfolio. Let's talk about when we learn something the first time or when we try to master something the first time. We're going to struggle. And yet we forget that as adults and we don't think it's going to apply to us because, well, we've already mastered so many things. We've already learned so many things. How are we going to struggle with something new? And yet we do. So if you know me, you know I've got 3 young kids. And this year, my oldest, my daughter, learned how to rollerblade. She had maybe done some roller skating a couple times before, and that was it. And this year, she decided she really wanted to learn how to rollerblade. And of course, in getting her the rollerblades, we also got her all the safety equipment, right? The knee pads, the elbow pads, the wrist guards, the whole thing, because everybody knows that if you're going to learn to rollerblade the first time, you're going to fall, right? That's expected. So we get her the safety equipment so that when she falls, she doesn't get hurt. We know she's going to fall. No one's going to learn to rollerblade and become decent at it without falling. And yet when we as adults go to learn something for the first time, we don't realize we're going to fall. And we don't think about that. And how can we start this safely? And how can we set ourselves up for success, realizing that struggle is going to be a part of the process? We're going to fall, metaphorically, right? And yet, what can we do to have our metaphorical wrist guards, elbow pads, all of those things so that the falling doesn't really bang us up? And that way we can do that falling, we can do that learning, and we can end up being successful. Struggling the first time we do something is natural, and it can lead to growth and to mastery if we approach it wisely. Let's talk about the challenges of trying something new in the realm of real estate investing and where I see a lot of real estate investors struggle. The first area I see a lot of struggles happen is in the area of bookkeeping and finance. A lot of people really don't feel comfortable with this in their everyday lives in the first place. A lot of people have money mental blocks that come into play, right? And if you don't know what the financial situation is, then it can't scare you. So we just stay in the dark. There's a lot of mental aspects. And then there's also just a lot of skills aspects. You're not doing the budgeting, taxes, cash flow forecasting in your personal lives that you may need to do in your real estate investing. So it can really be an area where people feel like they're thrown in the deep end and they're struggling. That's one of the first areas I see. Second, when people get into long distance real estate investing, that can be scary. And honestly, the fear of that keeps a lot of people from doing it, which is really sad because I know long distance real estate investing was transformational for me, both in terms of getting in better markets and in the sense of learning how to really be a hands-off leveraged investor and not using my own sweat equity in order to get returns. So I love long distance real estate investing. And yet it's something that people can struggle because they are using proximity to make things easier, right? You're doing things yourself. You're swinging by yourself. You already know the market well because it's where you live. So you don't need to know how to do market research, stuff like that. So getting into long distance real estate investing can be a struggle for people the first time. And then third, related and yet more broader, anytime you're entering a new market or strategy, there's going to be some struggle. If you have mastered long-term rental single-family homes and you decide to break into RV parks, you're going to stumble more than likely at some point, right? There's going to be some things that are not the same. And it's natural to not do something new, a new market, a new strategy, as well as you did your old one, because it's new and you haven't mastered it yet. So I'd like you to maybe pause and reflect for yourself on the last time you tried something new in your life. So I think we've established now that it's normal to struggle when you're doing something new the first time. And let's talk about why. Why does that happen? Well, first, obviously, it's a lack of experience. You don't have a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that you can draw upon because this is your first time doing it. Second, another thing that can contribute to the struggle is unrealistic expectations. Again, think of that rollerblading example. As adults, we don't think that we're going to fall. And when we don't have those realistic expectations, when we instead think, oh, we're not going to fall, we don't prepare for the inevitable fall. We don't have the wrist guards, the elbow pads, the knee pads, all the things. Another reason that struggle happens is an absence of support systems. There are other resources out there. If you don't have your own personal knowledge about something, there are mentors, resources, or tools that you can go to. But if you don't, because you're not preparing for the fact that it could be a struggle, then you're not using those resources and you don't have the support system in place to fill in for those knowledge gaps. So, what can you do to maximize success the first time you do something? We know there's going to be some struggles, but what can you do to maybe minimize the falls, right? Make sure that they don't hurt you. And what can you do to have as much success as possible? I'm going to share with you 4 things that I have learned and apply personally with my real estate investing to help me maximize my success the first time I'm doing something. First, I'm going to start small. Think of this as your minimum viable product or your MVP, a proof of concept that you want to test before scaling. If I have mastered single family home long-term rentals and I'm jumping into RV parks, I'm not going to jump into an RV park that's going to be the biggest thing in my portfolio, a huge financial stress for me, and a ton of spots, right? I'm going to dip my toe in to the shallow end and give it a little bit of a test because yes, I might get less returns because it's a smaller park, and yet I'm also going to have less falls or less spectacular falls if it doesn't go well. So think of it as easing into the shallow end instead of jumping cannonball style into the deep end. We want to start small, learn, make our mistakes on a small scale so we can learn and then apply our wisdom later on a larger scale. So that's the first tip, is start small. Second tip is to find resources, seek mentorship, coaching, or education about this before we get started. So if I was going to use that same example, I would go figure out who's an expert in RV parks and what can I learn from them? Do they have a podcast I follow? Do they have a course I can take? Do they have a Facebook group I can join? What can I do to learn about this and make up for my lack of personal experience as much as possible? That's step 2. Seek resources such as mentorship, coaching, or other things from experts in the field already. 3, invest in that research and preparation. So you found the people, you're going to spend time and money to do that research and preparation. Now, a lot of real estate investors are high Ds on the disc. You are dominant people, you're decisive people. You're like, oh, that looks great, I'm jumping in. I get it, because that's how I am too. And it's really great to just take a beat, just take a little beat, little pause, and do some of that research and preparation, investing some time and some money in it. And then 4, another thing that's like a helpful thought that I have, a question, is I ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? That is my 4th tip. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? And write it out. A lot of times people are so fearful and they don't take action because they think of these worst case scenarios. Or we have the opposite side where you're learning to rollerblade and you don't think you're going to fall because you don't realize what's the worst that could happen. So for both those situations, we're going to really be able to zero in and have realistic expectations if we ask the question, what's the worst that could happen? And write it out. I actually write out the list of what's the worst that can happen, and I put a probability on there. What are the odds of this happening, right? Because if you're a fearful person, you're going to be afraid and not take action because of a fear of something that has a 1 in a million chance, right? And if you're an overly optimistic person, which is how I often am, I'm going to not take into account something that maybe has a 25, 35, or 50% chance of happening. And then when it happens, I'm going to get knocked on my butt. Versus if I had thought about it and realized, hey, there's a decent chance this can happen. What can I do to mitigate the risk? What can I do to soften the fall? What can I do to learn about this and prepare beforehand? Things like that. So no matter where you fall on the scale, asking yourself, what's the worst that could happen? And writing down a list of everything that comes to mind and its probability as best you know it is really, really helpful. And the extra aspect to that I would add is use ChatGPT. I feel like sometimes ChatGPT can help show us our blind spots. So I would throw the situation into ChatGPT and I'd say, hey, ChatGPT, tell me what's the worst that could happen? Tell me the top 10 things that might go wrong and what their probabilities are. It may not give you a complete list, it may be totally off the mark, and yet, usually, most of the time, it's going to give you a few things that are helpful and that make you think of potential falls and plan for them. Now, I told you at the beginning I would share my go to strategy to help you succeed for the very end, and here's where it is. Start by focusing on one small win. Momentum is so important. Momentum builds confidence, it builds skill, and it really helps you take that small win and multiply it to bigger wins. I always think of a snowball. You start with such a little ball of snow, and what do? You put it down and you roll it and you roll it and roll it, and it compounds and it becomes a pretty huge thing, right? If you're building a snowman, if you've ever built a snowman, you know what it's like to start with a teeny tiny bit of snow and end up with a huge ball of snow that's the base of that snowman. So momentum, I've seen it in my own life, in multiple business endeavors, in real estate investing, how powerful it is. So focus on a small win, focus on where you can get one small win and then build from there. That is my go-to strategy to help as you start something new, because there's going to be challenges, there's going to be missteps, there's going to be falls. So focus on those small wins and just take it one small win at a time. They'll get bigger and bigger.